The salt-laced wind off Biscayne Bay used to be a comfort, a familiar embrace. Now, it feels like a cold hand on my neck, a reminder of the vast, indifferent ocean that swallowed so much of my life whole. My office, perched high above the shimmering water, once felt like a command center, a bastion of justice. Now, the panoramic view only mocks me, reflecting a fractured reality I painstakingly pieced together, only for it to shatter into 1,000 treacherous shards. I am Robert, a name that once carried weight in international maritime law, a man who built a career on righting the wrongs of the sea, only to be drowned by a betrayal deeper than any ocean trench. It began on a sweltering Tuesday, 3 years ago, though the memory still scorches like fresh pavement in August. I was at the annual Maritime Law Symposium, a blur of polished shoes and forced smiles, when I saw her across the crowded ballroom. Elena. She wasn't just beautiful. She possessed a captivating stillness, an almost otherworldly grace that drew my eye like a lighthouse beam. Her dark hair, pulled back simply, framed a face etched with a subtle sorrow, a vulnerability that spoke volumes even before she uttered a word. I'd always been a sucker for an underdog, for those wronged by the powerful currents of commerce and greed. My entire practice was built on it, rescuing fishermen from predatory contracts, untangling the knots of international shipping fraud. My heart, perhaps foolishly, had always been open to a plea for help. She approached me later, her voice a soft melody with a faint Caribbean lilt, like the whisper of waves on a distant shore. She had heard of my work, she said, my reputation for integrity, for fighting for the little guy. Her story unfolded like a tragic opera, a proud family legacy on a small, vibrant island, destroyed by a ruthless shipping magnate, a man named Castillo, who had systematically stripped them of their assets, their dignity, and left them facing destitution. Her eyes, dark pools of quiet desperation, held mine. She spoke of threats, of legal loopholes exploited, of a system designed to crush the weak. Her family, she explained, had run a small but respected freight company for generations, connecting their island with the wider world. Castillo, a shadowy figure with vast influence, had seen their vulnerability after a series of unfortunate shipping accidents, using proxies and shell corporations to systematically acquire their vessels, their docking rights, their very identity. She claimed he was threatening her aging parents, their ancestral home. She insisted, running from him, seeking justice, not revenge. I listened, truly listened, captivated not just by her beauty, but by the raw, palpable fear in her voice, the tremor in her hands as she clutched her small evening bag. I saw a reflection of all the people I'd fought for, all the injustices I'd sworn to rectify. My moral compass, honed over decades, spun wildly, pointing directly at her plight. This wasn't just another case. It felt personal. The sea was in my blood, a legacy from my grandfather, a Cuban immigrant who'd arrived in Miami with nothing but a fishing net and a fierce determination. The idea of someone like Castillo exploiting a proud island family, tearing at the fabric of a community, struck a deep chord within me. I felt a surge of righteous anger, a paternal protectiveness mixed with a nascent, unfamiliar warmth towards this vulnerable woman. I assured her then, my voice perhaps a little too fervent, that I would do everything in my power to help her. Everything. Our initial consultations were long, intense affairs, often stretching late into the Miami nights. My office, usually sterile, took on a different aura with her presence. She brought binders filled with documents, photocopies of contracts, deeds, bank statements, all pointing to a meticulously orchestrated corporate raid. Castillo's fingerprints, or rather, the fingerprints of his myriad shell companies, were everywhere. The complexity of the scheme was astounding, designed to be untraceable, labyrinthine. I saw it as a challenge, a worthy adversary for my skills. Elena sat across from me, her brow furrowed, occasionally wiping a stray tear. She never pushed, never overtly demanded, but her quiet desperation was a potent, unspoken plea. She would bring me small, thoughtful gifts, a bag of rare coffee beans from her island, a hand-carved wooden bird gestures that seemed to speak of a deep gratitude. My junior associates, always a pragmatic bunch, occasionally raised an eyebrow at the sheer volume of pro bono hours I was dedicating, but I brushed aside their subtle warnings. This was different, I told myself. This was justice. I began to dig, traveling to various Caribbean jurisdictions, sifting through arcane legal codes, interviewing former employees of Elena's family company who had been equally devastated by Castillo's takeover. The deeper I went, the more layers of corporate malfeasance I uncovered. Castillo was indeed a ruthless operator, his empire built on a foundation of legal loopholes and intimidation. Elena's story, it seemed, was proving true, piece by painstaking piece. Yet, there were tiny, almost imperceptible inconsistencies. A date on a document that didn't quite align with her timeline of events. A vague answer about the precise nature of her family's former financial partners. Moments where her usually perfect composure would slip, a flicker of something colder, sharper, in her eyes, quickly masked by a return to her gentle, fragile persona. I attributed these to stress, to trauma, to the inherent chaos of fleeing a powerful enemy. My mind, so accustomed to seeking patterns in legal documents, seemed to willfully ignore the subtle dissonance in her narrative. I remember a specific evening, poring over documents in my study at home, the scent of espresso heavy in the air. Elena had called late. She sounded distraught, whispering of new threats, hints that Castillo was getting closer, that her family was in danger. Her voice cracked, a raw sound of fear that twisted something inside me. I found myself offering reassurances that went beyond professional courtesy. I told her I wouldn't let anything happen to her, that I would protect her. And I meant it. In that moment, the lines blurred irrevocably. I was no longer just her lawyer. I was her protector, her champion. Her vulnerability had become a siren's song, luring me onto a dangerous reef. The strategy to recover her stolen assets was complex. It involved challenging the legality of Castillo's acquisitions through a series of offshore entities, proving duress and fraud, and then establishing a secure, untraceable trust fund in a neutral jurisdiction. I poured every ounce of my expertise into it. Countless hours were spent negotiating with foreign legal teams, deciphering intricate financial structures, navigating the murky waters of international asset recovery. It was exhilarating, a chess match against a formidable opponent. The stakes felt incredibly high, not just for Elena, but for my own sense of purpose. I imagined the moment I would tell her, her face lighting up with relief, with gratitude. We met in Geneva to finalize the trust. The air was crisp, the mountains majestic, a stark contrast to the humid vibrancy of Miami. Elena was there, looking elegant and composed, though still with that undercurrent of apprehension I'd come to associate with her. The bank officers were suitably discreet, the documents dense and impenetrable to the untrained eye. We signed, witnessed, and sealed. The funds, a significant sum millions, in fact were now hers, securely nestled in a trust designed to be beyond the reach of any future Castillo. It was a triumph, a culmination of months of relentless work. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride in my ability to bring justice where there had been only despair. Elena's hand, cool and soft, rested on my arm. "Thank you, Robert," she whispered, her eyes shining with what I believed was genuine emotion. "You saved me. You saved my family." We celebrated that night, a quiet dinner overlooking Lake Geneva. She was radiant, a lightness in her demeanor I hadn't seen before. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted. She spoke of rebuilding, of starting fresh, of a future free from fear. I felt a surge of satisfaction, the kind that comes from truly helping someone find their footing again. I saw her off at the airport the next morning, a fleeting kiss on the cheek, a promise to keep in touch. I returned to Miami, exhausted but fulfilled, ready to tackle the next challenge, the memory of her gratitude sustaining me. The months that followed were quieter. Elena's communication became sporadic, brief emails from various locations: Paris, London, a remote island I couldn't quite place. She was settling in, she said, beginning to heal. I accepted this, understanding her need for space, for a new beginning. My firm, meanwhile, was buzzing. The Castillo case had cemented my reputation, brought in new clients seeking my unique expertise in complex international fraud. Life, it seemed, was settling into a rhythm of hard-won success. Then came the call. Not from a new client, not from a colleague. but from a number I didn't recognize, an anonymous Washington, D.C. area code. It was the Department of Justice. Special Agent Miller. His voice was calm, professional, but carried an undeniable weight. He needed to speak with me, he said, urgently, about a pending investigation. My first thought was a routine inquiry, perhaps a follow-up on some obscure aspect of the Castillo case. I agreed to meet them. They arrived 2 days later, 2 agents, Miller and a younger woman, Agent Chen. They sat across my conference table, the very table where Elena had laid out her fabricated life and laid out the truth. It was a truth so stark, so brutal, it felt like a physical blow. Their presentation was methodical, relentless, each slide a nail in the coffin of my professional life, my reputation, my very self-perception. Elena, they explained, was not a victim. Elena was a player. A key player in an international drug trafficking cartel, a sophisticated network moving narcotics and billions in illicit funds across the globe. Her stolen assets were never stolen. They were dirty money, the proceeds of crime, laundered through a carefully constructed narrative and, most damningly, through my unwitting legal services. The corrupt magnate Castillo? He was a rival, a competitor in the same criminal underworld, and Elena had weaponized my legal skills, my genuine moral outrage, to dismantle his operations and seize his assets for her own cartel. The intricate legal framework I had so proudly built for her, the offshore trust, was not a shield for an innocent woman. It was a brand new, untraceable financial pipeline, a clean conduit for dirty money, expertly established by me. The air left my lungs. My world tilted on its axis. Every meticulous detail she had provided, every tear, every tremor of fear, every hand-carved gift, every whispered thank you, replayed in my mind, now twisted into grotesque mockeries. I saw her face, not as the vulnerable refugee I had believed her to be, but as a mask, flawlessly executed, designed to exploit my inherent desire to help, my connection to the sea, my perceived moral rectitude. The inconsistencies, the vague answers, the fleeting coldness in her eyes, they weren't signs of trauma. They were glimpses of her true self, expertly suppressed. Agent Miller continued, his voice unwavering. They had been tracking Elena for years. She was a ghost, leaving no trace, shifting identities, a master of deception. My involvement, they stated, had been a crucial step in her operation. I, Robert Sterling, maritime lawyer, champion of justice, was now a subject of a federal money laundering investigation. My firm, my legacy, faced potential closure due to unwitting complicity. I remember staring at the floor, the polished wood suddenly alien beneath my feet. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the monster they were describing. The hope, the fierce determination, the paternal instinct I'd felt, all curdled into a bitter, acrid taste in my mouth. I had been so utterly, completely wrong. Not just mistaken, but played, used as a tool, my very integrity warped into a weapon against my own principles. The betrayal was an amputation, severing a part of my soul. I had not saved her. I had become her unwitting accomplice, a clean hand washing dirty money. The days that followed were a blur of questions, documents, and agonizing self-recrimination. I cooperated fully, desperately. There was no other choice. My reputation, my life's work, everything I had painstakingly built, was gone. The shock gave way to a cold, burning shame. I felt hollowed out, gutted. My colleagues looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional distance. The trust in their eyes, once unwavering, was gone. The firm, a place I had called home for decades, felt like a mausoleum. I provided everything I had, every email, every phone record, every single piece of paper related to Elena. The meticulous nature of my own legal work, once a source of pride, now became the very evidence that dismantled her operations. The offshore trust, my masterpiece of protection, became the key to unlocking a significant part of the cartel's financial network. It was a perverse irony. My skills, honed to fight injustice, were now employed to unravel the very injustice I had inadvertently facilitated. The legal process was grueling. The Department of Justice, after extensive review of my cooperation and overwhelming evidence of my genuine lack of knowledge, decided not to pursue criminal charges against me. A small victory, a hollow one. but the professional repercussions were swift and absolute. Disbarment. The end of my career as a lawyer. The formal notice arrived in a thick envelope, sterile and definitive. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring, then sharpening into an inescapable reality. My license, the parchment that defined me, was revoked. My practice, once bustling, became a ghost town. I sold it, along with my share of the building. The panoramic view of the bay, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, now only reminded me of the endless horizon Elena had disappeared into, leaving me in the wreckage. I was 42 years old, adrift, stripped of my identity, my purpose. The sea, once my solace, felt like an abyss. For months, I wandered. Physically, I was in Miami, but mentally, I was lost at sea, battered by the storms of regret and despair. The weight of my own naivete, my own blind spot, was crushing. How could I, a seasoned lawyer, a man who prided himself on seeing through deception, have been so thoroughly, so completely duped? The answer, I realized, lay in my own idealism, my desperate need to be a savior, to believe in the inherent goodness of those who presented themselves as victims. Elena had known this, had preyed on it with surgical precision. Then, a flicker, a small article in a legal journal about modern slavery and human trafficking in the Caribbean. My eyes, once glazed over by my own suffering, began to focus. The injustice, the exploitation of vulnerable people, the systemic abuse of power, it mirrored, in a horrifying way, the very narrative Elena had constructed, but this time, it was real. This time, there were no elegant lies, just brutal truth. I began to volunteer, not as a lawyer, but as a paralegal, an investigator, an advocate, for a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting modern slavery and human trafficking in the very islands that had been the backdrop for Elena's charade. It was arduous, often heartbreaking work. I met real victims, men and women whose stories were raw, unembellished, devoid of the theatrical flourishes Elena had mastered. I saw the fear in their eyes, the genuine desperation, and this time, my eyes were wide open. I can't practice law, not formally, but my knowledge of international legal frameworks, offshore trusts, and asset tracking proved invaluable. I helped gather evidence, build cases for others to argue, trace financial flows that fund these horrors. The work is quiet, often thankless, but it is real. There are no grand pronouncements of justice, no high-profile triumphs. Just slow, incremental battles against a pervasive, insidious evil. The salt-laced wind still blows through my window, but now it carries a different message. It's no longer a reminder of betrayal, but a breath of fresh purpose. I learned that true salvation comes not from fixing another's life, not from rescuing a damsel in distress, but from confronting injustice head-on, with eyes wide open to the complexities and the darkness, accepting that even the deepest betrayals can forge an unwavering commitment to truth and righteousness. Elena took everything from me, my career, my reputation, my naive belief in my own discernment. But in the wreckage, she inadvertently showed me a new path, a way to use my skills for genuine justice, not for the illusion of it. The sea is still vast, still indifferent, but now, I navigate its currents with a clear compass and a heart, though scarred, that finally understands its true north.